that light coming from? I wondered. I screamed and immediately slammed the door. After living in an underground mansion for 15 years, I had come across a trap door that led me to a whole new world. My name is Karen, or Genevieve. I'm not sure which one to use anymore. Yeah, about that, I'll dive in real soon. First, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Just trust me on this one. Just like any other day, I woke up and got started doing my favorite thing, painting. My friend Coco just watched. I was busy chatting away with her when I tripped over the edge of a rug and fell flat on my face. I groaned as I sat up. That's when I saw the rug had moved, and there was a trap door under it. The trap door led to a tunnel, which led to that door I just opened. Coco and I stared at each other in shock. It took me a while to open the door again. We both stepped out into this new world. What is this now? We were so fascinated that we just started wandering, staring around in wonder. I had no idea how far we'd gone. Soon, it started to get dark, and I felt scared. At the top of the slope, we saw a sea of glittering lights in the distance. Coco pointed towards it and said, "That's where we must go." After some time, the ground beneath our feet went from squishy and green to hard and black. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a loud, speedy metal box with lights rushed up from behind me. It flashed by us with a loud honk. My heart was pounding. I had no idea what that was. I turned around to go back, but realized in horror that I had no idea where home was. We had to keep walking towards the lights. It was getting light again by the time we got there, and I couldn't stop staring at everything. Everywhere I looked, I could see creatures just like me, but they looked weird wearing these clothes. We were afraid, so Coco pulled my arm, and we ran into the nearest room and started walking around. I stared. There were shelves and shelves piled with stuff I had no clue about. But then I saw something familiar. Canned food. I quickly grabbed a few tins and we started running out when a man pointed at me and shouted, "Stop that little thief!" Someone grabbed me to make sure I couldn't escape, while another snatched the cans from me. I tried to explain, but they all just looked back at me with stupid expressions. And soon enough, we were getting our first car ride to the police station. When we got there, the police tried to investigate us, but they couldn't understand anything. We spent that night in a jail cell, and honestly, I felt quite at home in a room with no windows. The next morning, they got us out, and we were placed with a foster family, and that's where I was given the name Karen. Coco felt really scared and refused to go to dinner, so I had to go alone. The first night, they gave me my plate of food with a fork next to it. I thought it was odd, but I just started eating with my fingers. When I was about done, I looked up and saw everyone was staring at me. I thought it was odd, but I just started eating with my fingers. When I was about done, I looked up and saw everyone was staring at me. I noticed they were all eating with their forks. We had forks in the mansion, but I didn't know what they were for. I didn't really like being there. My foster dad and brother were mean. The only person who was kind to me was my foster mom. She taught me to speak and read. Coco would go and hide whenever we had our lessons. I taught her everything I was learning when we were alone. One night, when I thought everyone was asleep, I was teaching Coco when my foster brother walked into the room. He said, "Who are you talking to, freak?" I could tell that wasn't a nice word. I stuttered, My friend." He let out a cackle of laughter. "Dad, would you come in here and listen to this? Karen has a friend!" My foster dad walked in, and when my brother told him what I'd said, they both roared with laughter. The dad said, "I knew we got a really stupid one. Can we send her back, please?" They both left the room laughing, and left me feeling humiliated. I was just glad Coco had the chance to jump under the bed. And that night, I packed my few things, and we ran away. We ended up living on the streets for a while, which I liked in a way. I was free to do anything, and we didn't have to talk to anyone. We would dig through trash cans for food, and even found some new clothes. I woke up one day to find Coco gone. She had this habit of wandering on her own every now and then. Walking around the city, I noticed a few men off in the distance. They were all wearing black and were crouching down under a bridge. Suddenly, I started to see bright colors appearing all around them, like magic. Oh my god, it looked like paint! And out of cans, of all things. I wanted to be a part of it. I ran up to them, so excited, waving my hands wildly. But I guess I scared them because as soon as they saw me, they all ran away. I felt a little bummed, but I was happy they left the cans behind. I shook them and fidgeted with them for a while. Then I pushed the top down and sprayed myself in the face. My eyes! My eyes! I staggered around for a few minutes. As soon as my vision cleared, I picked up all the spray cans and hurried away. Coco found me soon after, and I was so excited to show her my new paint cans. After a little testing, I managed to figure out how they worked. And oh boy, there was no stopping me after that. I loved painting with the spray cans. It was so much better than painting with a toothbrush. Then, one day, as I was painting in a parking lot, a few guys came up to me. Looking at their black, paint-covered clothes, I realized they were the people I'd stolen the cans from. I was afraid they'd hurt me for taking their stuff. To my surprise, they spoke to me kindly and said their boss had been looking for me. Up close, I realized they weren't much older than me. Their black overalls looked old and torn. Just then, a woman walked up behind them. She was the most beautiful creature I'd ever seen. Overalls looked old and torn. Just then, a woman walked up behind them. She was the most beautiful creature I'd ever seen. She smiled and spoke to me so warmly, I would have followed her anywhere. Her name, she told me, was Sharon. She said that she was a painter too, and my graffiti was some of the most beautiful art she had ever seen. She also told me I could come and live with her, and she would teach me more. As I was about to get into the car, Coco tugged at my hand. "I don't have a good feeling about this," she whispered. I looked around, hoping no one had heard her. I shook her off and climbed into the car. She didn't budge. Fine, she could find me when she wanted to. Sharon's house was large and beautiful, and I was so happy she'd found me. This new world was turning out to be a better place than I thought. But soon enough, I started to discover that things weren't quite right. We were put in a room with a supply of paints and canvases. I wasn't allowed to leave the house. I soon realized the other artists lived here too, and no one could leave without Sharon's permission. I was happy to be painting, but as soon as I was done, Sharon would carry away my art, and I never saw it again. And she didn't give me enough to eat. If she was really pleased with my work, I'd get half a chocolate chip cookie as an extra treat. As time went by, she became more cruel. She kept pushing me harder, and I was getting so tired. I didn't really enjoy painting that much anymore. If I hadn't done all the work she wanted, she would shout at me. Coco was terrified of her and stayed hidden somewhere all the time. One night, I was really hungry, and I snuck into the kitchen in the dark. I had just taken a big, fat cookie from the jar. When Sharon walked in, she went totally berserk and screamed at me. She threw my cookie in the trash and locked me up for 2 days with only a few apples to eat. I was really miserable there, but I had 2 silver linings in my life: David and Billy. David was the kindest man I'd ever met. He was Sharon's personal assistant, and he brought us our weekly painting supplies. I would be sure to have a lovely piece painted before he came, because he thought I was just brilliant. I just felt warm and fuzzy inside when he smiled at me. He was nothing like my horrible foster dad. One time, when he dropped by, Sharon had just half-deafened me with her high-pitched screaming because I'd accidentally spilled a small can of paint. She had just stormed off when David came in. He said he would clean up, and handed me a bag of cookies. He muttered, "Sharon's a horrible woman, and I hate working for her too. I'll get you out of here one day, Karen. You just keep up your painting till then. I'll find a way for us both real soon." I felt ecstatic. "You just keep up your painting till then. I'll find a way for us both real soon." I felt ecstatic. Maybe he could take me in, like that awful foster family had. I started daydreaming about it. Billy was a new friend I had made. He was one of the painters I had met in the parking lot. He told me his parents had gone to prison, and Sharon had picked him up off the street many years ago. He helped me with my language skills whenever we were free. He often told me about his family, and I would tell him about my home under the ground and Coco. One day, when Sharon wasn't around, we were sitting in the lounge watching TV. Billy suddenly stopped at one channel. Sharon and David were on TV, and she had my paintings in the background. By now, I knew enough English to understand every single word. There she was, saying she couldn't believe people had fallen in love with her art overnight. She sighed and said, "I'm so busy painting, I barely eat." When they started mentioning the prices, my jaw dropped. I had started to understand the concept of money by now, and it seemed she was making a lot of it. Just then, David took Sharon's hand and said he was so happy to be with someone as beautiful and talented as her. He couldn't be prouder of her amazing work. I was heartbroken and so angry. I couldn't believe David had made such a fool of me. Billy was furious too. He said he couldn't let these people go on like this, and we should make a plan to escape. I was ready to go. Billy said, "Soon, you and I will be out of here for good." "Yes, and Coco, of course," I replied eagerly. He slowly nodded. We were struggling to come up with our escape plan, but after a few days, an opportunity presented itself. David was away, and Sharon had badly sprained her ankle that morning wearing her ridiculously high heels. Billy snuck up to me and whispered his plan to me quickly. Sharon was sitting in the lounge with her leg up on the table when I burst in and collapsed on the floor, screaming and holding onto my stomach. Sharon limped over and asked me what was wrong, but I just kept screaming and pointing. Just then, Billy came running in and said in fake panic, "It might be her appendix. She has to be taken to the hospital immediately." Sharon cursed under her breath. She started limping towards her car keys, but Billy quickly said, "I don't think it would be safe for you to drive with that foot. I can take her." Sharon looked at him with some doubt. Billy gave her a small smile and said, "I've worked with you for years, Sharon. You can trust me." She smiled back and handed Billy the keys to David's car. Billy picked me up, put me in the car, and we took off towards the hospital. About 3 minutes down the road, he pulled over and we started celebrating. This was way easier than we had thought. That's when we saw Sharon furiously driving up behind us. Sprained ankle driving up behind us. Sprained ankle and all. Billy saw her first in the rearview mirror. Well, 3 minutes is how long her trust lasted, and she looked mad. Billy turned the car back on and took off like a rocket. It was a wild chase for a while, with him taking turn after turn, hoping to lose Sharon. But she gained on us and tried to run us off the road. I could just feel her eyes burning into me. We raced through a red light with Sharon hot on our tail. Slam! Another car hit the passenger side of her car. Billy pulled over to the side of the road, horrified. She looked like she was uninjured, but her car was a wreck. We sped away from the scene as fast as we could. Sharon was even more dangerous than we thought. We called 911 and told them everything, all about her operation and the forced labor in the house. They said they would be going to the house to investigate, so we headed straight back to the house to meet them. In no time, the police showed up and raided the place. They saw everything they needed to know. As we were getting out of there, I saw Coco waving at me from across the road. Thank God! I had been wondering where she'd gone. I asked Billy to stop the car. "That's Coco!" I yelled excitedly. "She's there!" He looked around and said, "No, she's not." "She's right there, Billy!" I said impatiently. Billy became silent for a few moments. Then he said, "Karen, you've told me all about Coco, and I know you talked to her, but you have to know the truth. She isn't real." His words hit me as hard as the other car had hit Sharon. What was he talking about? "What do you mean? Of course she's real!" "Karen, there is nobody there. I've never lied to you about anything. Why would I lie to you about this?" Tears started pouring down my cheeks. "She's been my best friend forever. I've known her for years and years." Billy asked me gently, "Well, has she changed at all in all these years?" That's when it hit me. My best friend was still as tiny as when I had first met her. I had grown so much taller and bigger, but she had always looked like she was 5 years old. I started sobbing, and Billy hugged me tight. He said he was my best friend now, and he would always stick by my side. I cried into his shoulder, and when I looked up, Coco was leaving. This time, I had a feeling she was leaving for good. Not long after that, David and Sharon were behind bars, and I received all the money from my paintings. I was rich enough to afford a small place for Billy and myself. We also realized soon enough that we liked each other as a little more than friends. Once word got out that I was the actual artist, I started getting phone calls to be on popular TV shows. Of course, my incredible life story about growing up alone in the isolated mansion came out as well. I became instantly famous. When I thought life was perfect, I received a letter and opened it up, and it was a handmade card. And to my shock, the picture on the front was the image of a room I had painted in the mansion. I just stared at it and started to shake as I opened it up. Billy asked me what was wrong, and I told him to read it out to me. "Dear Karen, your real name is Genevieve. I'm Hannah, and I took care of you when you were growing up in that mansion." As Billy read the letter out loud, I couldn't believe my ears. It turned out that my parents had both been artists as well. My mother was a painter, and my father was a mad architect. The isolated mansion was his greatest masterpiece. He had brought my mom to live there with him. Apparently, after I was born, my mom lost her artistic touch and was no longer the same as she once was. She became bitter and envious of other artists, and she blamed me. She just left one day and disappeared. My dad was heartbroken and desperate to find her. He would leave me in the mansion with Hannah to go look for her, but Hannah was not allowed to ever show herself to me. He wanted me to stay in isolation, hidden from the world. She just had to make sure I had plenty of food and water and that I was well. Hannah said there were cameras installed everywhere, and she would watch me often, talking to myself and painting in the mansion. His trips became more frequent, and he was staying away longer. Then one day, he just didn't come back. Hannah says she found out years later that he had died in a car accident. But then I had been growing up in isolation for quite some time, and Hannah decided to honor his wish and not reveal herself. But when she heard about where I was now, she wanted to tell me the truth about my past. I was already in complete shock after hearing the story. But what came next shook me to the core. Hannah said she wished she could tell me more about my mother. All she remembered was that she was the most beautiful woman she had ever seen, and her name was Sharon.